Sometimes things happen so fast that we're left wondering what to do next. That's what happened to me one Thursday evening. My husband had gone away on a business trip, leaving me to face an empty house and a week of loneliness. I decided to relax by closing the door and letting the private space surround me. But then the door clicked and broke the quiet. The door opened suddenly, and the light from the hallway shone in, catching me off guard. I was left speechless, feeling a rush of shame, insecurity, and embarrassment. It was a moment I'll never forget. My name is Chloe, I'm 30, and I live a life that many people think is perfect. My husband Joseph is an executive at a large corporation. He's not only successful in his career, but also a loving husband. Our life on the surface, I've always been admired by many people. I have a beautiful house, a full life, and a love that everyone thinks is a dream. But even in the most perfect stories, there are still hidden corners that no one sees. In our married life, there is one thing that always makes me feel frustrated inside. It's difficult to put into words. Joseph is a busy man. He not only works hard, but he also strives for the future of the couple. Since getting married, I have gotten used to his he's often away from home, on long business trips and meetings that go on until late at night. I tell myself that this is necessary for his career and for our future together. At first, I was proud to have such a successful husband. Every time he came back from a trip, his eyes were full of love, and his gentle gestures filled the gap. The early days of our marriage were sweet. We often spent time together, telling each other everything. He listened to me, and I tried to do the same. I did everything I could to make him feel comfortable every time he came home, despite his busy work schedule. Joseph always tried to arrange for the couple to have outings and romantic evenings. I felt like the happiest woman in the world. However, as time passed, the pace of life seemed to change. Joseph, my husband, became busier and busier with work. He often went on business trips, and the meetings lasted from day to day, leaving him with almost no time at home. His absences increased day by day. Even when he came back, he was still under a lot of pressure at work. I knew he was trying his best for us both, but I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. The intimacy we had was no longer enough for me, and he seemed to realize it too. I didn't say it, and I didn't blame him, but I felt a growing sense of loss. I have a lot of emotional and physical needs, and I crave the bond between husband and wife. But the truth is that he is no longer strong enough to satisfy me. When Joseph was away, the house felt strangely empty and cold. It was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the clock and the rustling of leaves outside the window. Dinners alone, long nights in the big bed, everything made me feel lonely. I tried to fill that feeling of loneliness in many ways, reading books, practicing yoga, going shopping, attending classes. But those things only helped me forget for a moment when the night fell. Loneliness crept into every corner of my soul, like a shadow that could not be dispelled. I didn't want to blame Joseph, because I knew he loved me and he did everything he could, but that didn't ease the emptiness in my heart. I craved the closeness and intimacy that we had. I craved the closeness and intimacy that we had in the early days of our marriage. I didn't dare tell him how I really felt, afraid that it would hurt him or make him feel more pressured. But that silence pushed us further apart. I don't know how to bridge this gap. My attempts to keep myself busy are only temporary solutions. When I look in the mirror, I see a woman who is tired, not because of work or life in general, but is there a way to bring him closer because of the emptiness in her soul? I don't want to give up, but I also don't know where to start to mend the connection that has gradually faded. Can Joseph understand the things I have never dared to say? I fear that one day these things will push us into an irreparable distance. When Joseph told me that his stepson William would be returning from abroad, I felt I was curious and a little worried. William was almost 27, just a few years younger than Joseph and Joseph's son from his previous marriage. I'd never met him though, because since marrying Joseph, William had lived and studied abroad. Joseph always spoke of William with pride, and I understood that their relationship was very close. Even though they didn't see each other often, the day William returned, the house seemed to have more vitality. He was tall, had a handsome face. He had a warm smile that made people feel at ease. William was polite and had a good sense of humor. The atmosphere in the house, which was usually quiet, suddenly became more lively. Joseph was happy to have William back, and so was I. William's presence was like a breath of fresh air in the house, helping me to feel less lonely when Joseph was often away on business trips. William quickly integrated into family life. Family meals were no longer as. It was a big change. Instead of feeling cold, I felt cheerful. I realized that William's presence made me feel less lonely. He often helped me with small tasks around the house. Sometimes he even brought joy with interesting stories about his time living abroad. However, something happened that made the relationship between me and William strange. That day, Joseph went on a business trip again. He left William and I at home after dinner. After I took an early shower to prepare for bed, I wrapped a towel around my body. My hair was still wet. I didn't lock the bathroom door, thinking that William was in the living room. But suddenly the door opened. William stood there, frozen in the doorway. His eyes were filled with surprise. I was also frozen, not knowing how to react. In my panic, my hand accidentally pulled the scarf, and before I knew it, it had slipped off my body. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but to me it felt like a century. William quickly turned away, his face red. I was still in the bathroom, my hair and body wet, and I hadn't locked the door because I thought William was in the living room. But then the door opened and William stood there, looking surprised. I was frozen, not knowing what to do. I was also surprised when I accidentally pulled the scarf off, and it slipped off my body. It felt like it lasted a long time, but it was only a few seconds. William quickly turned away, his face red. He said he didn't know I was there, and he was sorry. Then he left, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling embarrassed and confused. I quickly pulled up the towel, blaming myself for not being careful. From that day on, the relationship between William and me was no longer the same. He avoided my eyes every time we met, and I didn't dare look directly at him. The atmosphere between us became awkward, although I didn't know it, but what confused me the most was the feeling in my heart. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the bathroom. The memory of William's shy gaze and that unexpected incident kept lingering in my mind, making me feel both embarrassed and excited. I blamed myself for those thoughts, but I couldn't deny that after the incident, I felt like I was paying more attention to William. Sometimes I would see him walking across the hallway, and my heart would beat faster. I tried to act normal, but deep inside I felt strange. I knew I shouldn't show this feeling. Joseph was the man I loved. He'd given me his trust. But when Joseph was away and William was at home, the initial awkwardness was replaced by a thought I didn't dare name. The turmoil in my heart made me unable to remain indifferent. William also tried. I noticed that he always tried to avoid seeing me alone, but that only made me more confused. I couldn't forget the look in his eyes that day in the bathroom. He seemed confused, but also carrying something unspoken. I told myself that it was just an accident, that everything would return to normal, but it didn't. The more I tried to forget, the more I realized that I was caught up in strange thoughts. As time passed, I was no longer myself. I began to pay more attention. William noticed every gesture, every look, every smile. Sometimes I deliberately created opportunities for us to be close, with a small request, a story that lasted longer than necessary, or simply standing where I knew he would pass. I couldn't explain why I was like this, but that new feeling was like a smoldering fire that I didn't want to extinguish in William's eyes. Sometimes I caught a look of confusion mixed with a little curiosity. I wondered if one time Joseph said he was going on a week-long business trip, leaving just William and me in the house. At first, I told myself this was just another period of time like before, but deep down I knew things were different since the incident in the bathroom. There had been an indescribable awkwardness between William and me, mixed with a conflict I didn't want to admit. One afternoon, I asked William to help me fix a cabinet in my bedroom. I knew it wasn't urgent, but I wanted to see how he would react. I chose an outfit that was more comfortable and revealing than usual. I stood close to him, intentionally creating a few small touches, a quick touch of the hand, a glance that lasted longer than necessary. William looked up at me, his eyes slightly confused, but he kept his composure. I could feel my heart pounding, knowing this moment was testing both of our limits. He said, "Just leave it here." His voice was soft but firm. He quickly finished fixing the cabinet and stood up, keeping a safe distance. "Do you need anything else?" William asked, his eyes avoiding mine. I shook my head, trying to keep my face calm. But when William walked out of the room without looking back, I felt a mixture of disappointment and confusion. Every night when Joseph called from work, I tried to keep my voice normal, not letting anything out. But when the call ended, I felt a nagging feeling. In my heart, I knew I was wrong. My thoughts and actions were crossing the line. But no matter how my rational mind tried to stop it, William's image kept creeping into my mind. The awkward look in the bathroom that day. The calm and careful way we were together. All of it appeared every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't help but think of him. Every time we accidentally met in the house, I felt my heart beat faster. William was no longer the same. He became less talkative and avoided eye contact whenever we met. But sometimes, in brief moments, I realized that he wasn't completely indifferent. Maybe he was also struggling with himself. Or was that just my imagination, to justify the growing feelings in my heart? One night, all the boundaries between me and William were completely broken. It was a Thursday night, almost a week since Joseph went on a business trip. The small house became quieter than ever. The surrounding space was so quiet that I could hear the wind blowing. I looked out of the window, but that quietness didn't bring a comfortable feeling. In fact, it was like a smoldering fire burning inside me, making me feel suffocated and empty. Since I got married, I had never felt so lonely. Joseph's business trips were not uncommon, but this time, the feeling of emptiness lasted longer than usual. It seemed that this distance was not just geographical, but also a profound lack of connection between husband and wife. I lay on the bed, trying to close my eyes till I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't. I had this overwhelming feeling that I couldn't shake. I realized that I couldn't bear this any longer. I had this sudden thought, and before I knew it, I reached for the phone on the table and turned on the screen. I started searching for movies that could help me release some of the rising desire. I told myself that this was just a way to fill the void and dispel the loneliness that surrounded me. I got into bed and started watching the images on the screen. My feelings got stronger and stronger, and I found myself getting more and more absorbed in the movie. I stopped paying attention to my surroundings. I relaxed my body and let my emotions take over. I was in a state of bliss. I completely forgot to lock the door. Maybe deep down, I didn't care about anything other than relieving the frustration in my heart. I just knew that after a week away from my husband, I needed to fill the void in me somehow. Just as I was reaching my emotional peak, the door to the room suddenly opened. I was startled and my whole body froze. Light from the hallway shone into the room and William stood in the doorway. His eyes widened, revealing shock and confusion. We looked at each other without saying a word for a few short seconds. I quickly pulled the blanket up, covering my body, which was in a state that could not be hidden. My heart was pounding, both from fear and from an indescribable feeling. I felt a bit embarrassed. "I'm sorry, William," I said, looking down at the floor. I quickly closed the door and left, leaving me alone with my uncontrollable turmoil of emotions. When the door closed, I was still sitting there, my whole body trembling. I didn't know how long I had been sitting like that, feeling the confusion and shame that seemed to cover the entire room. Suddenly, the door opened a second time, before I could calm down. William walked into the room. His eyes were filled with confusion, but also determination. I was startled. My heart was pounding, and I was scared and embarrassed. I quickly pulled the blanket up to cover my body. "William, what are you doing?" I said, my voice shaking. "Get out. This can't be done." But William didn't answer. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on me as if trying to penetrate every defense I tried to put up. William sat down on the bed, just a short distance away from me. His hands were shaking slightly. But he was still touching my shoulders. "Sister, is it that Dad doesn't satisfy you?" he asked, his voice low but probing and tearing himself apart. His question made me freeze. "No, it's not like that," I said, trying to keep my fragile composure. "William, this shouldn't be, we can't." But my voice was so weak that I couldn't believe it. William moved closer, his eyes never leaving me. "You're seducing me, aren't you? Your eyes, your..." His gestures, his body language, everything was saying it. He needed me. I opened my mouth to deny it, but I couldn't. My body stiffened, and I couldn't react. My eyes were drawn to his, despite my desire to avoid them. I tried to speak, but my flushed face and flustered gaze betrayed my words. He could read my mind. He leaned down, wrapped his arms around my waist, and pulled me into his embrace. The warmth of his body made me lose all ability to resist. I trembled, but I didn't push him away. I didn't say another word. His body made me lose all ability to resist. I was trembling, but didn't push him away, nor did I say another word. "You don't need to say anything, just look at me and I know." His voice whispered in my ear, gentle, but like a fire burning away all the barriers in me. I wanted to push him away, but instead, my hands unconsciously tightened around his arms. The conflict in my heart disappeared completely when his lips touched mine. It was gentle, but no less intense. I knew I was crossing the line. I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't stop. We merged together, and I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. The light from the hallway outside shone through the crack in the door, witnessing the complete breakdown of barriers between us. When it was all over, I lay quietly in his arms, my body and mind filled with mixed emotions. I felt regret, but along with it came an indescribable feeling. If I'd crossed a line that I couldn't go back from, I didn't know how I'd face tomorrow. But right now, all I knew was that from then on, there was no boundary between William and me. All the boundaries that had existed had completely disappeared. We no longer had shy glances or evasive gestures like before. Every time we met, our eyes contained something that only the two of us could understand. We still lived with our stepmother and stepchild. Our private moments made William and I feel like a real couple. William became the one who filled the void in me, both emotionally and physically. Every look, every touch, every word seemed to make up for what I had missed in my marriage with Joseph. But I knew that this feeling could not last forever. Indeed, it did not last long. One day, William announced that he was going back abroad to complete his unfinished course. It was like a bucket of cold water poured on me. I didn't show it on the outside, but inside, I felt a strong sense of loss. I tried to keep a calm face, but with each passing day, the thought of William leaving made my heart heavier. The day William left the house was filled with regret. Joseph and I took him to the airport together before entering the check-in area. William turned to hug Joseph, then walked towards me. I held him in my arms a little longer than usual. Joseph stood there smiling, maybe thinking that I couldn't bear to leave William because of family ties. But only William and I understood that this hug contained more than that. "Take care of yourself," William whispered in my ear. His voice was choked, but he was still trying to sound calm. I didn't say anything, just held him tighter, as if I was holding on to the last moments when he walked away. I felt empty inside when William left. The house became eerily quiet. I went back to my daily routine. I moved in with Joseph, but I still felt empty inside. I was like a shadow in the house, doing everything mindlessly. I tried to tell myself that everything would pass and that time would heal my feelings, but the truth was that the void left by William was bigger than I thought. During the long nights I lay with Joseph, I felt trapped. Although Joseph still loved and cared for me, those feelings were no longer enough to fill the void I was missing. One night after dinner, I decided to have a frank talk with Joseph. I didn't mention William, but I opened up about my feelings. "Joseph," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I feel like we've been drifting apart lately. You're always busy with work, and I feel lost. There are times when I feel like I'm all alone in this marriage." His voice was sincere. "I didn't know you were suffering like this. My work took up so much of my time and I didn't give you enough attention. I don't blame you. I think we need to change, or else I'm afraid we won't be able to continue living like this." Joseph was silent for a long moment. Finally, he took my hand and squeezed it. "You're right. I've been so caught up in work for so long that I'd forgotten that family is the most important thing. I'll change." I didn't know how long that promise would last, but I felt a sense of relief when I finally got my thoughts out a few days after that conversation. Joseph told me he was quitting his job. "I've worked hard all these years, and I've saved enough money for us to not have to worry about money anymore. He said he wants to spend the rest of his time making it. It's up to you, so we can really enjoy our lives together." I was surprised by his decision, but at the same time grateful. Joseph finally understood what I needed and was willing to change for me in the following days. Joseph spent more time at home. We went for walks, cooked together, and had long evenings talking like the early days of our marriage. There were still hidden corners in my heart that I could not share, but Joseph's presence somewhat filled the void in me. I did not know what the future held. I was hopeful that things would improve, at least for now. I felt I could still find peace with the man I had chosen after William left. Gradually, things returned to normal. Joseph was true to his word and spent more time with me. He stayed home more, taking care of me with sincerity and love. We had peaceful days trying to rebuild the connection that had faded. But deep down, I knew the cracks in my heart would not disappear easily. William was like a shadow creeping into my memory, reminding me of I used to think that feeling the feeling of loneliness would make me happier, but I was wrong. Crossing the line came at a price, nights when I looked at Joseph sleeping soundly beside me and wondered if I was worthy of his love. The answer was always no. My mistake had made our marriage more fragile than ever. Joseph, who had idea what had happened, still loved me with all his heart. No matter how hard I tried, I still couldn't forget the feeling that I had broken the most sacred trust between us. Looking back, I realized that my biggest mistake was not being honest with my own feelings and needs from the beginning. Loneliness and emptiness are not reasons to justify crossing the line, no matter the circumstances. I should have talked to Joseph sooner, instead of letting loneliness lead me astray. Marriage requires not only love, but also understanding and sharing. Avoiding and staying silent about problems only causes the relationship to gradually crack. If you feel lonely, be honest with your partner. If you feel empty, don't let it overwhelm you. Find healthy ways to take care of yourself, such as reading, learning a new skill, or connecting with friends. Maintain ethical boundaries, no matter what the situation. Remember that a moment of weakness can destroy a relationship. Cherish what you have and always think about the consequences before acting. If I could do it all again, I'd choose to be honest and courageous in facing the problem, rather than letting mistakes control my life. Heartbreaks can be expensive lessons, but don't let them become lessons that cost you your happiness. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks everyone for listening to my heartfelt confidences. I hope this story will be a lesson for us to cherish and preserve happiness. Bye for now.